Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, Get Your Writing Done. I hope you're all at home, staying at home, being healthy, and I hope you don't get too bored. I also hope you can properly see us and hear us and see the screen of the PowerPoint as well. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Emma and I'm an international student ambassador. And we're organizing this event today together with the Center for Academic Writing and Communication. In the other screen, you can see Djuddah. He is the head of the Center for Academic Writing and Communication, and he's going to be doing most of the talking. I basically just wanted to tell you that we have a planning that first Djuddah is going to talk. He's going to give you general advice. With his slides, he's going to talk about how to start writing, basically, how to plan it and structure it, what the university expects, and then how to actually get it done very broadly. And after that, we will have a Q&A session. Some of you have already sent in your questions. If you have more questions, if you come up with them during the webinar, or if you already have them, please post them in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of them when Djuddah has shared his advice with you. All right, Djuddah, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Emma, for the introduction. And thank you all for joining this webinar. It's a strange situation, I think, for all of us. And Emma and I started talking about organizing a webinar. I think it was maybe a couple of weeks ago, before this whole situation got a little bit out of hand. I think the initial idea was just to invite people to a lecture. Then we got talking after the situation, and we suggested that maybe it would be good to organize a webinar. And here we are. It's my second webinar, and it's always a little bit strange because the only thing that I'm looking at is a screen, and I can see that there are a number of participants here. Actually, the number is 103. So welcome to all of you. Which means that I can't see who's there. I also can't see who I'm interacting with, but I do hope that you will actually, raise your questions in the chat, as Emma said, in order for us to have a little bit of a conversation later on. Well, let me start I'll start talking to you about getting your writing done, because I think most of you really have joined this webinar because you are, writing. Because you are tackling writing tasks that that are either difficult to complete or difficult to start. I'm sure some of you are working on your BA thesis or MA thesis, and I think specifically in a situation like this, we, AVOK, the Center of Academic Writing, we really try to support students when they are stuck with their writing, or when they need advice on how to improve their writing. Some of the things that we really see is that it's important to build an understanding first of what academic writing is, and why we actually struggle in so many cases, and what some of the solutions are. Well, let me just start first with the question of, what academic writing is. And it might be just a very simple question. I teach academic writing to students, and of course, most of them expect that I just provide them with the answer. But what I always do in introductory classes about academic writing is raise this question in order to try and find out, okay, well, what do you think academic writing really is? So what is your perception of academic writing? So one of the most common answers to that question in those introduction sessions is that academic writing is formal writing. Academic writing is logical writing. It's writing which is structured. There's a degree of honesty in academic writing. It's standardized, it's factual, and it's filled with citations. And although that these answers really are true, they are just a small fraction of what academic writing is. The thing is that with these answers, most of them are actually referring to something that is related to style, right? So when we think about academic writing, we think about a specific style of writing. And style often refers to the kind of language that we use when we have to write academic text. And that's again where we see some of those kind of like frictions of, you know, being able to complete academic writing. So formal writing has a specific tone. You know, academic writing, if that is formal writing, engages into formal language. We see that we have to use a professional language in academic writing. It needs to be unemotional and unbiased, and these aspects are then related to an academic style. But actually, that is not entirely true, because if we go deeper into these questions, you know, we ask ourselves, okay, well, what is formal language? You know, does that mean that in academic writing we are not allowed to use informal language? And actually, we are. The same thing when we talk about professional language. So, what is professional language? Right, all of you, and well, some of you might actually be in different disciplines. So we all have our professional language usage within those disciplines. So we need to think that, you know, not all the language that we use is specifically related to an academic language. It might be really discipline specific. And the same thing when we talk about, you know, unemotional language. You know, we hope, and I will talk about this a little bit later, that actually the language that you use does provoke emotion. So again, there are different ideas about what academic writing is in this context, specifically when we relate it to just style. I think a maybe more truthful answer of what academic writing is that academic writing is a journey. And at the same time, this is, I think from my perspective, the most truthful answer. It might also be a worthless answer because it doesn't add anything more than just, you know, what we have to go through. So life is a journey, of course, but academic writing actually is a journey if we actually look at the components which make academic writing. So the metaphor is relevant here as it actually describes those three actors involved in academic writing, and those three actors are you as a writer. So you as a writer actually have to go through a journey of discovery and learning when you are writing your text, right? So writing your text is a journey of discovery and learning. The second actor is the text itself. And when we look at the text also needs to provide a journey, right? The text is a story, and it's a story with a beginning and an ending, right? So if we think about fairy tales, for example, all of those start with once upon a time and they lived happily ever after, right? A clear beginning and a clear end. And this is the same thing what we would expect from the text itself, right? The story needs to have a beginning, an introduction, and a conclusion. And then the third actor in this context is the reader, right? So the reader who is reading your text also wants to be taken on a journey, right? So the reader also wants to be moved by ways of your story and wants to be attracted to the content that you have put together and wants to actually have an emotional connection to the way that you have connected all the information which are presented in the text itself, right? So we have here three different types of journeys, right? It's the journey that you take as a writer, the journey of the text itself, and the journey of the readers. Of course, this is relevant to all texts that we write, but in the case of academic writing, you know, we do see that it really is important in terms of what academic writing has, right? So it's not so much academic writing is, but more or less that academic writing has. And academic writing has a purpose, academic writing has a specific audience, and academic writing has a specific tone, right? So when we talk about purpose, it is really important for you to develop an idea why you are writing your text. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. But let's say, for example, academic writing has a purpose, and the purpose is really to contribute to a field of knowledge of a relevant topic that you are writing on. In this case, when you are writing for that purpose, then you are also writing to a specific audience, right? So who want to actually read the information that you are providing, the contribution that you are providing to knowledge? Are they scholars? Are they your peers, researchers, scientists, or your instructors? And then, of course, the tone that you use in order to write that text. Is it formal, unemotional, and unbiased? If you think about your purpose, if you think about the text that you are writing and the purpose that you might have, right? Is the purpose then just to complete your text, or is the purpose for you really to contribute to a field? And of course, then this really depends very much on the kind of text that you are writing, right? And we look at these, well, let's say six text types: an essay, a thesis, a report, a summary, a literature review, or a BA thesis. Yeah, depending on the kind of text that you actually write, the purpose might be different. The audiences who you are writing for are different. And of course, the tone that you use within those are different as well. So an MA thesis might actually be targeted much more for a scholarly audience, or scientists. You want to persuade them, or you want to show them that you have done research and that you have come up with a new idea or a new theory or new evidence about that. A summary, for example, might be completely different, right? So the task might be to write a summary about a book, and you can write that summary primarily from the perspective of I, for example. So I think that this is the way that I have read the text, and that's the same with a report. Reports seem to take different tones than an essay. So in all of these genres, we call them, so all of these text types that we are actually writing, you have to choose right at the beginning the kind of journey that you are going to set out for yourself, for the text itself and for the reader. And that's what makes it really challenging overall, right? So every time you write another text type, you have to consider that journey. And that journey, of course, requires a lot of planning, right? You need to set out that plan from A to B or to C, and how you're going to get there from the starting point to the end point. And that's why, when we talk about academic writing, we have a part of it which is related to planning, and planning is an important component. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. Just wondering, in this context, right, how helpful that actually is. Again, when we look at that, the metaphor of a journey. In this context, I, of course, would say that it's quite helpful for a number of reasons. It's helpful primarily from an emotional perspective. A lot of times, if we think that we are going to write an essay, and we are going to use that essay as a journey, and a journey which is actually full of joy and confidence, it becomes so much more easier to write that text. And it sounds a little bit cheesy in a way, but it is really an important aspect, because if you actually look at your text and think, okay, well, there's no connection to it. I don't see the purpose of writing this text. I don't see it as being a journey for myself or for the reader or for the text itself. There is this aspect of block which really stops you from setting out that journey in that text. And the same thing is when you look at other texts, right? So examples of things that you read, and you feel, okay, well, I can't produce that kind of thing, or really, I want to produce that type of text. That aspect of perfectionism also really doesn't help, right? So it doesn't help that kind of journey that you go on. You need to find some form of joy and confidence, whatever you write, or the journey that you take in order to write. Because if we actually look at the end point, and that's something that we look at quite often. And these are things that your instructors provide in terms of the writing guidelines. We look at the end point where we want to get to. We have all these examples of these kind of like theses which are published, essays which have been written, and we're thinking, okay, well, that's where I need to get to. But the end point is not important. You have to take the whole journey, because if you don't, you actually don't really learn how to write that text or find joy in writing that text. So this leads to the question, of why we write. So why do we actually write? Ask you to write. And when I say we, you know, why do we instructors or we, the university, ask you students to write text, a thesis, an essay, a report, etc. There are, I think, three major components that are important to understand why we actually write text. And at the university level, it's primarily related to skills development. And of course, that skills development is something that you already do from primary school. From the moment that you learn to write, you write more and more and more. Because if you don't write, you don't develop that skill, right? It's the same as learning a bicycle, riding a bicycle, or, you know, you need to be able to practice in order to develop that skill. Now, you are confronted with different sets of writing tasks, as I mentioned earlier, essays, reports, theses, and all of these are accumulative in order to develop those different set of skills you need in order to set out those different journeys. So that's the most important thing, of course. The second point here is that, well, we ask you to write primarily because we see that writing really helps the learning and the thinking process. And I'm sure that some of you, you know, when you are actually writing your text, feel that learning and thinking process when you are actually engaged in your text itself, right? There's, for us, nothing more powerful than learning through writing. You know, so going into the dialogue with the content of your text. And that's another reason why we ask you to write text. The third point is related to voice. Again, that, you know, going through university is also about being able to find your own voice and find your own stories within the knowledge that is being presented to you, right? So how do you interact with that knowledge, and how can you communicate that knowledge to an audience? You know, so where is your well, your part in that whole section in this case. So finding your voice is really important, and finding your voice within your writing is also really important. And you find that by just going through lots of repetitions of writing and writing. If we actually take out the second one, which is the learning and thinking part, there's a little bit of a discrepancy here, because what we do say is that you need to write a lot, and we do want you to write in order to learn and in order to think about the topic that you are writing about. But at the same time, we actually do not want you to produce a text or to hand in a text, which is what we call a thinking text, right? There's a difference between this thinking text and the text itself, right? So you use writing in order to think and develop your thinking, but once you are going to submit the text, it should not be a thinking text. It should actually be a text that has already been thought about, right? So it should be a representation of your thoughts, not of what you're thinking, because those thoughts need to be organized, and those thoughts need to be clear for me as a reader. And there is a big difference between those two different texts. And that's where we see a lot of difficulties, a lot of discrepancies in students in when they are starting to write. And of course, it's also related to how much time you take to developing your writing, right? So the idea is much more, again, that's when we talk about how do you get your writing done, you have to take your time to think before you actually write, or you need to take your time to think while you're writing. And that's more or less what we call that kind of like planning phase, right? So you think while you're writing, or you really think a lot about how you are going to write. So planning is essential in this case. Outlining is essential. Thinking about the kind of functions that you want to build into your text, you know, so how you want to develop your argument, how you want to develop that story, really takes a lot of planning. And then once you have that plan, you start to write a lot. And then that writing a lot basically means just free writing, right? Don't worry too much about whether that text is academic or not, right? So just write about the topic that you want to write about. So free writing is something that we really encourage, right? Don't stop when you think that you have made a spelling error, or when you think that a sentence doesn't express exactly what you want to express. because that's the part where you can start to revise over and over again. So when we talk about writing, writing is maybe not the right word to use. What you should be doing is revising, right? And that's where the writing process really comes into play. And I'm sure that you've heard of the writing process itself. Your instructors might have talked to you about it, that you need to engage in the writing process. But actually really understanding what the writing process is and actually embracing it in its fullest makes writing so much easier, right? And too often, way too often, we do see that students actually collapse the pre-writing phase, the drafting phase, and the editing phase into one, primarily because they just run out of time. But time is a really interesting aspect here. I will come to that in my next slide, right? So if you look at this slide here, and we talk about the, let's say, pre-writing phase, it is really about defining purpose, thinking about who you're writing to, your audience, outlining, gathering ideas, reading, etc., etc. These are important aspects. And once you start writing, you start to be able, well, once you start drafting in this case, right, you use different ways in order to develop the text for it to become academic, right? And then in the final stage, you start to edit your text for it to match the requirements, let's say, of an MA thesis or a BA thesis. So coming back to that aspect of time, right? So is it a good thing to, for example, deadlines are, work wonders for us. So when we have the deadline, the night before, we sit down, we finish that text and we hand it over. How often are you really satisfied with that text? And does it take less time in this case to write that text than any other way? So does the process take more time? So what we can actually see here, and I want to refer to the research that is done by colleagues of mine from the University of Antwerp in Belgium, so Marielle Leijen and Luc van Waas. So they really do very interesting research by getting students to sit behind a computer, and that computer has keystroke analysis installed, so that every keystroke and the student makes when writing their text is recorded. And what we see here, and I would like to just point out the left side graph, is this is the time aspect, and this is a professional writer, so this is an expert writer that we at work, and how an expert writer writes over that span of time. So this is the span of time here, and on the other axis here is the amount of characters that are being produced while typing. And if you look at this line here, if you can see my cursor, it somewhat ends up into, let's say, 1,200 characters of text in the final document. The line here actually produces more than 3,000 characters. And what we see is that actually the writer produces much more text than actually is left in the document here, right? So the writer is not a writer, but a reviser. Produces a lot of text here and uses all of these parts here to revise the text for it to meet the criteria that is needed. The green dots here are related to the amount of time the writer pauses. The line here means that a writer is just copy-pasting information, but what we see going on here is that lots of revision going on the copy and paste, because of course copy-pasting is not allowed unless you make good references to it. On the other hand, of course, what we see here is the novice writer. And again, we see that time, and we can see here that for the same task, the amount of time it takes is much longer, primarily because the green dots here representing the pauses, the writer needs much more time to think about the things that are being written or that he or she is writing about. The amount of time that it takes for the writer to start, which is represented here by this red box, and the just very slow accumulative line of writing text and actually not revising text. So there's a little bit of revision going on towards the end. So this is the novice writer. So the novice writer just types, and then towards the end submits the text. It's done. But the professional writer really revises a lot of that text, gets a lot of writing done, and then starts revising in much less time. And that's of course important again when we refer this back to the writing process. right? So planning, we see, and outlining your writing or your ideas really does help. So setting out that journey right at the beginning makes the writing so much easier. It makes it easier to evaluate the product that you have in the end, and it makes it easier just to follow a clear line of thought. Okay, well, just to move on to something a little bit more practical, because this webinar really is about getting your writing done. How can we translate this, what I've just talked about, into really getting your writing done? So the first thing that I want to say is that getting your writing done really means making time and setting time aside for your writing. And I'm sure you do. And you would sit behind the computer and we'll start working on the task, and because it's so demanding, because it's so difficult, you will just maybe block it off and say, okay, well, we'll do something else. But put aside some time in your agenda. Say, okay, well, in the morning, I will set aside 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, to do my writing. And it doesn't matter if you focus on the task and you just manage to get like 3, 4, 5 words on your page. That doesn't matter. If you do it every day, if you do it habitually, then all of a sudden you will find that you will get into the flow of writing. It is really a mindset that you need to set yourself to. And setting that kind of time for yourself in order to engage in the task is really, really important. And I might give you another few more solutions towards the end on how you can make yourself accountable for that, and maybe not yourself, but also others. Right. The other point is that planning is essential, and I've mentioned that already, I think maybe 2 or 3 times. Right, that pre-writing phase really is important. Right, so it goes back to the idea of structuring your story, making sure that you plan who your audiences are going to be, planning how you are going to move from one topic to the next topic, and even saying, okay, well, these things are not relevant. Or even when you look at your final product, putting that next to your plan, saying, okay, well, I've not actually planned for those, or are they still relevant or not? Right, so planning really is essential. Purpose, right? So find your purpose when you are writing your plan. Going back to the question again, so why are you writing this text? And this is quite often, when we have or had consultations with students about their writing, some of the main questions that we ask, okay, well, why are you writing this text? Right, so what is your purpose? And someone said, well, I have to write this text, right? It's part of the course. I need to get a good grade for this. Or, the reason I have to write my text is because my teacher says so, or because the curriculum says so, the course says so, for all these reasons. And those are fine. The other question is more or less, okay, well, what kind of grade do you want to get for this text, right? Is it really important for you to get a really good grade for this text? And if it is, then you have to really make sure that you help yourself to structure it in such a way. Right, if you think, okay, well, I just need to submit this, to get a grade, then, binge writing at the end of the day might be just fine. There's nothing wrong with that in that sense. But you also have to think about the kind of results that it actually brings towards the end, right? So again, if your purpose, with your text or with your thesis really is about, okay, well, I want my text to influence or persuade my instructor about, the knowledge I have of a specific topic, or I want to use this text as a way to improve my language skills or improve my my text organizational skills, or whatever. So there needs to be a good purpose as to why you're writing that text, and it needs to be defined. That's very important. One of the most important things, I think, in order to get your writing done is to engage with others. We know that writing is a social act, and of course that in the current situation that really makes things really difficult. But when we talk about writing as a social act, as I have already mentioned earlier, that social act is not just in the physical context, but it's also just in the space context where you as a writer are writing in a dialogue with your audience, right? So that's already a social context. That also means that if you are writing a text, maybe it is a good idea to ask somebody who is an audience to give you a response to that text. So how would somebody respond to that text? Share your writing with others is essential for you to have a bit of an idea. Okay, well, what does my text do? Right? So does my text meet specific standards? Or, you know, does my text actually engage with the audience that I intended? Or, you know, does it provide or raise those questions that I want? So it is important that you share your text with others, but that social context is also more or less making sure that you share and make and give this kind of accountability for your production. So, for example, we suggest that if you need to write, and all of you need to write, you know, that you can actually share that responsibility in such a way, not that you write your text together, but that you say, okay, well, I need to submit an essay then, or I need to finish my thesis then. You need to do the same thing. Okay, well, let's agree that by the end of the week, you know, we will have a draft, and each of us will read the draft of each other, and we will give comments, right? So this kind of agreements that you make with each other really does help in order to feel at least accountable for something that you're writing. So we do feel that we need an audience. We need an audience to write for, and if we're just writing for ourselves, it becomes so difficult, you know, to try and motivate ourselves. It really is difficult. So make agreements with each other, right? So you can write, you know, in separate locations and share your text by email. You can, you know, send each other your text and read them and give feedback. But you can also write together. So just an example of what we do with PhD students in the communicating science course is that we have shut up and write sessions. So we call them shut up and write sessions. And this is an example of a one-day shut up and write session which we had last week. So we invite all the PhD students to join. And then this is Zoom, so we've asked students to join in Zoom. And we have a specific structured schedule. So in the morning, 9:15 we start. We write for an hour, 15 minutes. And after an hour and 15 minutes, you know, I ring the bell saying, okay, well, we're all done. 15-minute break. After 15 minutes, let's go again. Another 1 hour, 15 minutes of writing. And I always make sure, you know, that I'm present, that if there are any questions that I can answer those questions. But also just to make sure that people feel that everybody's writing, you know, that everybody is doing the same thing. And it really works. It really helps those who need to feel that they are not alone in this process, but that others are doing the same thing. We need to see, you know, that others are struggling the same way that we are struggling. Another tool that you can use is something called the Pomodoro Technique, and some of you might know it. It doesn't work for everyone, but for example, with those shut up and writes, so we sometimes run them like a whole day, and we have 1.5 hour, 1 hour and 15-minute writing sessions. Sometimes we have what we call the Pomodoro sessions, which means you focus for 25 minutes and you are not distracted by anything. So turn off your phone, anything else, and you focus on what you need to do. And it doesn't matter if you can't produce anything, just as long as you're still focusing on the task itself. And then once the timer rings, 25 minutes, you have a 5-minute break. So in those 5 minutes, you know, do what you need to do, you know, check your messages, your Facebook, whatever, you know, and then once the 5 minutes is over, again, work for 25 minutes. This really works well if you have some sort of like writer's block and you're trying to find a flow, right? So again, you make yourself accountable for just really focusing on a specific time and then getting started. And what we find quite often is after a couple of what we call tomatoes or pomodoros, you know, you will hit that flow and things will go without actually the timer itself. You know, then there's also, well, actually the web is filled with, you know, useful advices. But you know, in the end, they are just advices, and the best advice that I can give you is just when you need to get your writing done, just write and don't read and don't look at social media. But this is one example of something that I found, you know, this morning, which I think again, you know, represents really well all of the things that I discussed right here, which are important, right? So finding ways to socialize, writing teams, you know, build a schedule in there. And just to end on that note, right, To keep it practical for yourself and to really get your writing done, find a purpose, plan for your content, enter the dialogue with the text, the dialogue with the readers, but also the dialogue with your peers. Plan time for writing, put it in your agenda, share your writing with others, and don't be too much of a perfectionist. And I say this also being a perfectionist myself, but being a perfectionist actually really doesn't help, right? So you have to have some sort of balance and saying, okay, well, some things are good enough for me to send at this point. You can always improve your writing. So write to learn and be free in the text construction that you have. So don't be too restricted by what we might consider to be academic writing, because it's more than just academic writing. So don't let that label fool you too much. Okay, well, that actually ends my webinar. So I really want to thank you, and I really hope that at least that there are some things that that are useful for you to engage with, to practice. I'd like to also actually suggest and maybe say that if I look at this thing that I do with the PhD students, that we do with the communicating science students, that if you would want to engage with this as well, I'm happy to start one and invite you to write with me on a Shut Up and Write session. So if you think that is useful, if you would like to practice it, just let me know and we can get something going. And finally, well, thank you. And questions. So I hand it over back to you, Emma.
Great. Thank you very much, Joost. I think that was very helpful advice, at least for me. I hope also for all of you who are listening. We already got some questions actually in both the chat and the Q&A option. Someone said, you should take the reader on an emotional journey, in quotes, but the tone of the academic writing should be unemotional. How is that supposed to work?
Well, what I also mentioned is actually that it's not entirely true. So when we say that your tone has to be unemotional, it's not. It's quite often what we are advised to do in textbooks. But unemotional doesn't actually mean that we can't put any words to persuade or to move people, right? So we need to write with language that actually does. Well, that's not dry. So unemotional doesn't mean dry. Unemotional does mean that you are not going to say that, well, I believe this and I think this, and what I say is the truth.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. We also got a question which is very relevant to the situation right now. Private and academic or professional sphere are not separated anymore from where you live, because most of us are working from our own rooms. How can we overcome the situation of lacking a private sphere where work has no place, if working in private sphere become the same place? Are you still there? Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I think something happened with the connection.
All right. You heard my question?
The question about
separating work from your private life if you're working from your home, basically.
Okay, well, this one I didn't. So separating private life from working.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think again, yeah, you have to somewhat schedule it in a way that really does help you to become more, let's say, engaged. And for example, schedule it for 15 minutes a day. If you're really working in a room, where there are many other people, children, partners, then it really does become a little bit difficult. But I think, making those agreements in order to find time to write, and sometimes you might be able to schedule in, let's say an hour, and other times you might be able to schedule in 15 minutes. But I think, that's, yeah, everybody has to manage that in their own ways, in their own environments. It's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Someone also said that they scheduled the time for themselves to write their thesis, but this caused more anxiety instead of that they actually did something and asked for alternative options. Would you say that the options that you talked about, like writing together, this shut up and write options, would that be a good alternative to this?
Absolutely, and you know, this anxiety is really real, and it's really problematic. So we do see a lot of students even, you know, well, you know, dropping out of their final year, bachelor and master, primarily because, you know, the fear of having to complete that thesis just becomes too much. In this case, actually, the most important thing is just to actually talk with others about the writing, and talk with people who might understand you or who have written a thesis before. I mean, you know, the Center for Academic Writing and Communication is primarily set up in order to support those students who are really facing these kind of anxieties, in order to support them through those difficult times, and just to find small incremental steps, you know, to get parts of that text done. It's really difficult, and finding, well, you know, seeing others actually going through the same you know, same process really does help, because you're not alone in this. Absolutely not.
All right, that's a good one. We also got a question where someone said that after deep literature review, I feel like the most important aspects and questions are already answered and there's no room left to contribute. Is this a common problem, or does this mean that you have to go deeper into the problem?
It has to do with an aspect of confidence, right? So reading up on the things that we, you know, on the topic that we are interested in, and finding, you know, no room for added discussion is a problem when you don't think that there, you know, that there are small parts that you can actually contribute in. So there are issues that you need to find within the literature that you can engage with, have a dialogue with. And a lot of times, again, it has to do with the fact that, you know, what we read seems to be already such a product, you know, that the writing that we do itself needs to reflect that kind of, like, reflect that kind of product. But once you start actually engaging with the topics that you're reading about, you know, the more and more having discussions with them, you will also find well, places and parts that you can actually contribute to. But it really takes a lot of time to think and rethink, and to you know, to talk with those topics, and not only to talk with the topics that you are reading, but to talk with other people about those topics.
Okay, so for example, your thesis supervisor as well, or?
Absolutely, but even peers. So thesis supervisors, of course, is the first place to go. But yeah, in this time, maybe it's more. I don't know how close or how well connected your thesis supervisor is, or how well they are able to advise you. So if they can't provide you with those answers, you do have to find other people to provide you with support again.
That makes sense. We also have a question about whether you recommend any books, websites, or articles concerning academic writing. I'd like to also say to others that this was just an introductory section. We will have other sessions as well. So if there are topics that you think you need to know more about, there will be ones in the future where we will focus on specific topics that go deeper into that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the problem is that there are so many websites and books and resources to go to. My suggestion usually is actually don't go there, but just write your text, because all of them will say something else and give you different advice, and you're reading them and, you know, growing more anxious about them because you're not writing.
Right.
So my advice is that if you have a specific answer, a specific question, you know, then ask somebody.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question that's also probably specific to this person, but we can still share it. What if I do something totally new in my thesis, but fail to achieve a good accuracy, which makes this useless? So instead of feeling like you don't contribute anything, you're coming up with something totally new, but the problem is the accuracy.
Yeah, it's again a little bit what I mentioned about, you know, so why are we writing? Right, so when we think about BA thesis or MA thesis, so let's say your scientific contribution might not be that essential. Right, so when we talk about scientific contribution, they become so much more important once you are actually in research. PhD students, even, so they are still in that phase of learning. So once you are a researcher, you need to be much more engaged in the topic itself, and you become very, very, narrowly focused on that topic. For the MA thesis, BA thesis, it's still very much a learning process. So, even if you don't really have something unique, the way that you are tackling it or the way that you are presenting it is the most important thing. So are you being, let's say, scientific? Are you using the right methodologies? Is your thinking right? Is your the development of argumentation, correct? So those are more important things.
And what if you come up with an argument at the beginning and after all your research, it turns out not to be true? Is that a bad thing?
No, I mean, I think, a bad result is also a good result. At least, that's what we like to say in science. So, even if you want to prove something and actually it turns out that it's not the case, then basically you have proven that that's not the case.
You can reject the hypothesis.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Another question, how to find value in your academic work when in the rapidly changing world of today it doesn't feel important anymore?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I think that value has to really come from within. So there has to be, it has to be valuable, first of all, for yourself. But at the same time, it has to be valuable for let's say, the few people that you are writing for. So something that is valuable now might not be valuable, in 1 year, 2 years, or even 1 month to come, but that doesn't matter. So it is about creating a value for the text that you are producing at this moment, right? So that's why we constantly need to keep writing, because the contributions that you provide at the moment might provide the incentives for a new idea for, let's say, next week or next month.
Right, that's a good one. I see we have one more question. It goes back to the question on confidence. It says, whenever I start exploring a new topic, I end up having terrible anxiety, realizing there's so much I don't know. This affects the quality of the writing process. I think we have all experienced something similar to that. Is there a specific technique that can help to overcome this, or is it also about a mindset? Thank you.
Yeah, it's again, this is quite a problematic issue, primarily because it again relates to issues of anxiety and the way that we feel about writing. But of course, that in order to be able to write about a topic, we really do need to increase our knowledge on that topic. And of course, we can read a lot and we can continue reading and reading and reading everything that we want to know about the topic. But if you consider your text itself, let's say your thesis, the planning of that really is important, because you also need to plan the kind of content that you want to put in your text. Right, so you need to plan the scope of your research, and that means basically not including everything. Right, so your starting point is a frame of reference, and you have to stick to that and develop your arguments based on this, because of course we can't know everything, we don't, but you have to put that in the frame of your research. You have to stop at some point somewhere, and of course use the writing to develop your knowledge on that topic.
Right, and of course you're also reading this as a student, while the people who wrote this might be professionals or experts on it, so we shouldn't get down because of that. We also had a question before already in the Facebook group. Sometimes you want to edit your own work or look over it, look for mistakes, make sure that there are no small mistakes and have the details also being perfect. But how do you distance yourself from your own work if you have written it? Or at least I think most people have the experience that you're kind of biased when you're reading it yourself. You read over the mistakes that you made.
Yeah, it sort of depends on what kind of mistakes you're looking for. So when it really comes down to, let's say, language that you want to check, then I would suggest give it to somebody else, because they are much better at picking out those mistakes than you are. So we have this very deep connection with our text. The best way actually to detach yourself when you actually want to sort of evaluate whether the text that you have produced does the things that you planned is to go back to your plan. So we talk about, the importance of planning, making an outline. Once you have written your text, you can make a reverse outline. So look again at all the paragraphs that you have written, make a reverse outline of that. So what do they do? And does it match the outline that you have produced at the beginning? So these are really good techniques in order to distance yourself from the text.
So it's good to leave some time in between the moment that you've written it and that you look over it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of people who spend a lot of time on their text, especially their thesis, once they've done their thesis, they just, just want to get rid of it and throw it away and, completely sick of it. And that's understandable. So even, I don't know, a detachment, and I don't know how long you need in order to detach, but at some point you just need to submit it, So it's a better way to not be too attached to your text or to the content of that text.
Okay. If there are any more questions, please ask them in the chat. But until now, it seems that we have answered all of them. So Joost, I would like to thank you. This was very, very helpful. This was just an introductory session. So we've seen that the maximum number of participants was reached, which means that we were popular enough to repeat it. So we will have different sessions. We will let you know what the next session will be about, what topic. Also let us know as participants what you would like to learn more about, or if you already have questions for the next webinar. You will see it on the Facebook. We will post new events there. And yeah, thank you very much for participating. And thank you as well, Joost, for your wise words.
Well, thank you, Emma, for initiating this, and I really hope that we can do this again. Again, my invitation, to run a Shut Up and Write session is still there. So if you think that might be useful, then we can talk about this as well.
Exactly, and so we will share the recording of this webinar as well. It will be, after it's edited, it will be uploaded to the YouTube page of the University of Tartu. We will share it to everyone through email because some of people couldn't join anymore. But they were registered, they will get it through email, and we will also post it in the Facebook event. All right.
Thank you, and take care, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I hope it was helpful. Have a nice day.